All right, hello, and welcome to our weekly viaTalks series. My name is Kevin Schwartz. I'm the marketing manager here at viaForensics. Thank you for joining us. A couple housekeeping things before we get started. First and foremost today, we're talking about user experience design. We've got what we think is a great talk for you. Phil Weber is our Director of UX, and we're going to talk about his background a little bit in just a second. But today we're going to talk about designing mobile apps and a good user experience. A few things for housekeeping before we get started. You can follow along with everything that we do here at our viaTalks series with the hashtag viaTalks on Twitter. That's viaTalks, viaTalks on Twitter. We're going to be live tweeting during today's talk and all subsequent talks in the future. You can also check out the hashtag and see all the past content that we've posted, including full viaTalks, as well as little snippets of question and answers and some of the questions and things that we talk about as we go. We will have a Q&A. That'll be at the end. You'll see, if you look on your right, you've got a little questions box there. Go ahead and type those in, and we'll go ahead and make sure that we get those questions, as many as we can, answered. And we like to keep this, somewhat time sensitive. We understand that your time is very valuable, and we want to make sure we respect that. So we'll try to keep this to about a half an hour. So if we don't get to all questions, we'll try to answer them afterwards on our YouTube page. All right. Moving on, as mentioned, our presenter today is Phil Weber. He's the director of the user experience here at viaForensics. He's our design team leader, has worked with multiple clients that are listed there, and Phil's just been a pleasure to have. He's really revitalized the way that we're able to communicate with our users, and our apps are able to communicate with our users, and how our users are able to experience those. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Phil.
Thanks, Kevin. Looking at mobile user experience design, I started thinking about what's the best place to start understanding this topic. And it's easy to jump into wireframing, looking at details of a specific user interface, talking about the best way to design for iPhone or Android. But to be really successful at any type of user experience design, you really have to understand the most basic thing, which is design itself. And so design is really just a problem-solving methodology. And it comes down to thinking about people, thinking about their needs, thinking about your business or organization, and marrying those needs, whatever they may be. You're going to have to be doing a lot of thinking, and there's no way of getting around it. You can do user testing, you can look at analytics, test things all day long, but you're never going to get around the fact that you're going to have to do a lot of thinking. You're going to have to get in the minds of your users, think through things that cause them pain, things that are difficult for them, things that make them happy, just a lot of thinking. One of the most well-respected design thinkers of all time was Dieter Rams. He was the design director at Braun for decades, and he's really the main inspiration behind a lot of the Apple design that's taken place. He's kind of Johnny Ive's hero and my hero as well, and he has these 10 principles that I always look to when I'm trying to understand what good design is. And I won't go through all of them, but the basic idea is thinking from a human perspective. You're building software, and it's easy to get lost in what's easy to do. But when it comes down to it, it has to work for people. And, people like things that are useful. They like things that are easy to use. They don't want to be confused. And kind of a basic idea behind design is that the user is never wrong. If a user is confused, they have a problem with the software, it's not their fault. It's a problem with the software, and it's something that you need to reevaluate. And some of these other ones are really more of a philosophy. So good design fits into the world, and it should be honest. You shouldn't be misleading people using what we call black patterns. What you're building should be long-lasting so that it doesn't waste the resources that we have available to us. Really, truly amazing design is all about the little tiny details. So you need to go all the way through from having an amazing strategy to fine-tuning the tiniest detail, because all those little details communicate something to your users. If you're just going to read one book about user experience or really design in general, I recommend you reading The Design of Everyday Things by Don Norman. This book isn't going to tell you really anything specific about mobile design per se. It's more focused on the everyday things in your life. So, for example, how do I know how a certain door works? There's this idea of an affordance. So a handle on a door is an affordance, and it indicates to you how it works. So the shape of that affordance, the placement of it, color, everything communicates something to you about how that object works. So this book is the perfect place to get started for just understanding the idea behind what design is. And then if you're going to read two books about user experience design, I'd recommend The Elements of User Experience by Jesse James Garrett. And it's a lot more specific to user experience design. So it's going to take you from that kind of abstract ideas from the design of everyday things that are really just about the philosophy behind design to more of a project-focused application of the ideas of design to accomplish a certain thing. So starting with strategy, organizing things, planning them out, then applying some sort of aesthetic look to them, executing them, and putting them into practice. So talking a little bit about the process for mobile user experience design. And again, it's not really specific to mobile UX so much as just the application of design in general. So the first thing you need to do, again, is understand people, understanding who your target audience for this mobile app is, and then combining that with the needs of your organization. So what is the user trying to do with this thing? What are they trying to accomplish? And what tool am I giving them to accomplish that? The nature of software development is that it never really stops. So you're never done with a mobile application. As long as you have active users, you're going to be developing it. You're going to be fixing bugs, adding features, and there's just going to be constant improvement. So what you need to do is get into a cycle of continuous improvement. And that's going to start with coming up with new ideas. Starting on paper is generally the best. And then you're going to evaluate it in a few ways. So you're going to want to present it to developers you're working with, ideally other designers on your team, if they're available, the leader of your organization, and get input from all of these groups. Does it align with the needs of your users? Does it accomplish the business objectives? Can we as a software development organization build this? And if not, are there ways that we can adjust things to build it better or faster? The next step is you're going to want to create something that you can test. So, if you have a huge team of mobile developers, that might mean actually building out the features and testing it in its almost complete form. There's also some really just fast ways to validate ideas. You can make simple prototypes using paper and mock going through the actions of your app. And then there's some nice tools now for prototyping on the device that I'll get into a little bit later. The real objective here is just to get these ideas in front of real people and validate that they work and then adjust them. And then you're going to want to just continue this cycle. So, you've tested these ideas, figure out what works, and then you're back at the idea stage. Now, how do I apply this learning? Specific to mobile UX, there's extremely detailed guidelines that can be your best friends. So if you're designing for iOS, there's pages and pages of documentation from Apple that you can dig into and really understand the philosophy behind the operating system and the apps created for it. The UI patterns, stylistic elements, development challenges, functionality limitations, everything. And another important thing to note is if you're designing for a platform that you don't personally use, it's really important to carry that device in your pocket for a little while. If you're an iPhone user, you really need to know what it's like to have an actual Android phone in your pocket for a week or two. And don't have your iPhone as a backup. Just completely commit to that device and pretend that you are an Android user to fully understand that platform. So getting into a little bit more specifics about how you go from idea to execution, I always start with sketching on paper. I find it's the best way to generate ideas. It gets you away from the computer, away from distractions. It gets you away from specifics of UI implementation and technologies, and it just gets you back to thinking about people. Once you've kind of worked through ideas at a basic level, then I move on to wireframing using digital tools. And there's a ton of tools for doing this. It's not all that important what you choose. I personally am in love with the application Adobe Illustrator. What you're trying to do is create wireframes for every possible state of your application. The simplicity of a single mobile app screen can be really deceptive. But anything beyond just a simple application, there's a lot of hidden complexity. There's multiple states, multiple forms of interaction, and it really helps to wireframe out every different state, cover a wall with them, and then look at them, bring in people from your team, developers, leaders, everybody, and get them to look at the entire breadth of what this application is going to do, and give you feedback, validate your ideas, give you input, talk about implementation, all that stuff. So once you have some pretty good wireframes in place, I generally move on to some sort of prototyping. And you can see here a few tools that are pretty good right now. I generally use a tool called Envision. But basically the idea is you're just throwing design files together into a prototype that you can put on your phone. So you can press the buttons and move around and get the feel for how this thing is actually going to work. You can look at sketches and wireframes all day, but it's not real until it's in the context that your users are going to be using it. Some of these other tools, Pop is kind of interesting. It lets you actually sketch things out on paper and then take a photo with your phone and just really, really quickly blast out prototypes. But ultimately, it doesn't matter what you're using. It's really just that validating the ideas by making something in the proper context, holding it in your hand, playing around with it. And at this point, you're probably going to want to start thinking about your visual design system. And ideally, this means you have someone helping you out who's dedicated to art direction, and not necessarily required, but it really makes life a lot easier. What you want to be doing here is thinking about a modular visual design system. So depending on the complexity of your application, you're going to be applying a lot of different styles across similar objects throughout your application, and they all need to look consistent. You want to train a user, set their expectations, avoid any confusion. So you don't want things to look drastically different from one point to the next. And also this is the opportunity to start delighting them. So paying attention to little elements like animations and how things are connected, illustrations, just making things, humans like things that are aesthetically pleasing. The big, big challenge is getting it built. It's relatively simple to draw out a UI sketch, but getting something turned into a real product is very complex, especially depending on the level of complexity of what you're trying to accomplish. At viaForensics, we're tackling something really big, and you can go look at our application today and say, the UX isn't perfect. It's because we're tackling something huge, and it's tied in with very advanced backend systems. It's on iOS, it's on Android. There's a web application for a free version and an enterprise version. There's a very advanced API. There's security research software that ties in. It's just a lot of orchestration, and it's a lot of collaboration. You're turning something that's very complex into something that, at the end of the day, is a simple experience for the end user. And I can't stress how important collaborating with developers is. They're your best friends in this process, and you're basically nothing without them. So how do you improve mobile UX over time? I've mentioned that this is a cycle of continuous improvement. So what are the ways that, once you've got a first group of concepts and a minimum viable product, what do you do to continually improve your UX over time? And the long story short is you listen to your users. There's a lot of different ways to do that. The best and quickest way is to just get it in front of people. Every design you do, you should show to at least 5 to 10 people. And you're going to uncover a lot of things, just the glaring holes in your design. There's varying degrees of user testing. You can see in this photo that there's a very advanced setup with a camera pointing at the device and monitoring exactly what the user is doing, maybe a camera pointing back at their face so you can see reactions. But all that really matters is that some real person uses it, you watch them use it, and then you talk to them about the experience that they had. And that's going to be what they call a qualitative understanding of how people use your product. It's more about emotional response and less the quantitative hard numbers that you're going to get from things like analytics. And that's going to be something that you'll really monitor over time. So analytics is, it's quite a process to get it all set up correctly so that it's giving you meaningful information. Obviously, you need enough users for that information to be statistically relevant. It's pretty easy to see basic stuff like, I have this many users in my application today. I had this many signups this week. But what you're really going to want to do is work with your developers to set up certain specific actions and analytics that are meaningful for you so that you can track those key progress indicators for your business. Things that drive the business and also make your users happy. So whatever platform you use for analytics, and there's a ton of really good ones, it's something to put a lot of effort into and don't underestimate how much effort it takes to really get analytics optimized for your mobile application. So tracking App Store ratings and reviews is incredibly important. And as having a new app, you're probably going to have some relatively harsh reviews. It's going to be a little bit difficult to see them, but it's really important that you look at them in detail and not necessarily do exactly what people ask you to do in those reviews, but respond to the intent that they had when they were trying to communicate with you. It's also best to try to follow up with these people and try to help them fix the specific bugs or problems or concerns they might have with your application. Respond to everyone very quickly, try to resolve issues, just show them that you care about the experience that they're having with your app because they're an early adopter of your application. Your support system is going to be a really big advantage in this as well. So those users that have specific problems and are passionate enough about your product to go through a process of finding out how to contact you, writing up a message, they're going to be giving you incredibly valuable information. So responding to them quickly, solving their problems, it's really important. They're going to be giving you very actionable, specific things that you can do to improve your product. What are some of the biggest challenges you're going to face doing UX for mobile? And there is certainly no shortage of them. But a few of the big ones from a design perspective are going to be finding your role in the software development process. So you're going to be part of a software development team, and you're probably going to be the minority in it. You're going to be using systems like GitHub and HipChat and Kanban boards and agile development. These tools and systems are optimized for developers. They're not optimized for coming up with 10 design concepts and getting feedback and iterating on them. They're just not about your processes as a designer. So you're going to have to be really proactive about getting involved in these systems. And you're going to have to really carve out time to focus on design. It takes a lot of time and a lot of dedicated focus to a single topic to really think through what you need to do to come up with a great user experience design. You're going to have to come up with 10 ideas and pick them apart. Pick the one that has the kernel of a great idea, refine it, and then make it look like you just picked that simple idea out of nowhere because it's so obvious. But it really, again, takes a lot more time than you think, and maybe a lot more time than your organization thinks that you need to do it. So setting expectations there is pretty important too. You're going to have a lot of strength to sell your ideas internally. So working on a software development team, if you're lucky, you're going to be working with some really, really intelligent people. And they're very passionate about what they're working on. So they're going to be really passionate about the issues that you are creating designs for. You're going to have rationale behind all your ideas. Everything's going to have to be thought through. But you're also going to have to be ready to listen to the developers and capitalize on the great ideas that they have and make them feel included in the design process. Design is not an exclusive process. You're not saying, no, developers can't have any input. I'm the designer and I make all the decisions. You should be ready to capitalize on great ideas no matter where they come from and not let your ego get in the way. And then in different organizations, there's kind of different ways of going about selling your ideas. At some organizations, you're really going to have to be backing up everything you propose with numbers. It's kind of the Amazon philosophy. It's not always the healthiest, but you may need to expect to have some sort of analytics to back up why you're making a certain proposal. The next one's release planning, and this can get very complex, especially for the types of things that we're working on here at viaForensics. So when we roll out a new feature, it's not just releasing a new version of the mobile app. We're releasing iOS and we're releasing Android. We're the same feature at the same time, and the API has to be ready to support the new feature. The web dashboard may be presenting certain parts of that information from that feature as well, and then getting all those things built in tandem at the same time, figuring out the timing for that. It's really complex, especially factoring in things like the iOS approval process. So we always have to plan that iOS goes out a week ahead of time, and we hope gets approved during that week. And then we have to hold off on the release of everything else so that we can release everything at the same time, and the new feature can go live. So it's just a lot of orchestration going on there. API and admin tools can be pretty big challenges. So a lot of the heavy lifting happens on the back-end side. And for things like we're working on at viaForensics, there's a lot of workflow to consider. And that's heavily related to design too. You might be thinking, I just have to design this mobile app that the end user sees. But you also have users inside of your organization that are populating content through some sort of content management system or doing some sort of approval process for sending out information to your users. Mobile UX is kind of like an iceberg. There's the little bit that you see, but there's so much more going on behind the scenes. So I touched on this a little bit earlier, but getting analytics set up is pretty tricky, and it can take a significant amount of time. So you have to really devote time to thinking through what the progress indicators are that you need to put in place. Then you need to work with all the different development teams to get them put in place. You need to figure out who's going to be watching the analytics and how do you take action based on the analytics, just more orchestration. And one final thing I'll touch on here is cross-platform consistency. So from a design perspective, it can be pretty challenging to have a, platform agnostic product, basically. So when a user goes to your website or they go to your iOS application and they go to your Android application, you want them getting the feeling that it's one cohesive product. And then you get back and you look at those UI design guidelines, and they're going to, from one guideline document to the next, they're going to tell you wildly different things. So you're going to be trying to create a system that works across everything, and that's a pretty complicated thing to do. It's the kind of thing that a professional art director really helps out with a lot. Figuring out, what is our visual design system across all of these different platforms? What compromises do we have to make? to delight our users. So I highly encourage you to download our app, viaProtect, in both the Google Play and iTunes Store. We're working on creating a product that really helps you understand the security of your personal device. And then kind of our long-term vision is giving tools to enterprises that then let them make sure that the devices that people are bringing in from home are also secure. So that's the end of what I had prepared. We're going to be going into Q&A here in the second phase and looking at some of the questions that have come in from you guys.
Thanks, Phil. You mentioned KPIs. For those that aren't aware, we use that in marketing all the time as well. That's key performance indicators. So you want to constantly be looking at what are these things that we're interested in, how are these metrics moving, where are those going, how are we moving them over time, and are they doing what we want them to do? I think that flows along a lot of mediums here in business. We've had a few questions come in. First question, how long do you toy with a mock-up before you move on to the next stage?
It depends on a lot of factors, I guess. The complexity of what you're doing. If you're building a social application that's been done a million times, it doesn't take a lot of ideation. If you're trying to come up with something that's brand new, you could spend weeks on a mock-up before it goes into development. It also really depends on the amount of time you have available. You might be on an agile team and they're saying, we need to build something today. So you really have to balance giving developers what they need to be making progress while also looking at the long-term vision for the product and designing for the long term while giving them something to work on in the short term.
Very good, and I know we went a little bit over. Thank you everybody for dealing with the audio issues this morning. I want to make sure that we get out on time, so we'll take one more question, then if anyone has any more, we'll answer them afterwards. But Phil, you just recently touched on Android and iOS. Can you talk about some of the things you see as the hardest hurdle in making the user experience solid on both iOS and Android, cross-platform, basically?
Yeah, that one is specifically pretty challenging for us with viaProtect. There's pretty different possibilities on both applications. So Android's going to let you have a lot more freedom to do a lot of things, and iOS really locks things down. So it can be pretty difficult for an application like ours to have the same experience across both platforms. You really have to look at, it comes down to product strategy. So does it make sense to invest extra effort into the amazing functionality that you can put into an Android app if you're not going to be able to provide that to your iOS users?
And one final question that came in, and then we'll wrap this up. What are some of the common UI design patterns on iOS and Android?
They are getting more similar. And you'll see things like products like Spotify or Pocket or Flipboard. You'll see those apps doing a really good job of picking out the things that are common between the two, and those experiences are pretty similar across platforms. I don't know how much it makes sense to get into specific UI patterns, but drilling into things, even things like back button functionality in Android, they're replicating a lot of that in the UI now. There's a lot more similarities than differences between the two platforms at this point. The differences are things like system level stuff, like notifications, which settings you can change, how users are alerted about the permissions that they're granting to an application. But from most interactions, they're not wildly different anymore.
Very good. Well, I think we're going to wrap it up here. Thank you so much to Phil Weber. His contact information is up on the screen, and he's our Director of User Experience. Again, we'll post this full viaTalks, probably editing out the few moments of dead air within 48 hours. Typically, we'd have it up in 24, and then we'll have some specific edits of some of the questions as well. If you have any questions, please feel free to tweet at us with the hashtag viaTalks, or search that hashtag on Twitter and you'll see this plus all of the previous viaTalks stuff as well. Thanks again, and we'll see you next week.